Welcome here at whitewavefrequency, your portal to expansive spiritual practices and learnings with husband and wife duo Genevieve and Denzl as your committed kindred hearts. As the universe and our Mother Earth is abundant in their diverse creations, so too are we in our experiential teachings, uncoverings, and deep remembrance. In the space of tranquil peace and love, we share about the magical properties of plants, embodiment, shamanic and spiritual practices, light language, music, essential oils, herbalism, and the ancient ways of our ancestors. May your return home to your authentic self be blissful, pure, and simply ecstatic. Happy arrival.
Welcome to White Wave Frequency. This is our first podcast attempt, and we are going to be discussing shaman drums. My name is Denzl Keenan. With me is
your wife, Genevieve Keenan.
Thank you. This is our first attempt at doing a podcast. Why are we doing a podcast?
Well, I think that we have very interesting conversations, and I think that we have always wanted to share it, even long before podcasts existed. Making videos is sometimes a bit tricky, so this is just, I think, the next step that is intriguing to both of us, that feels a bit more natural and authentic, and a way that we can share our inner teachings with many other people.
I think on this awakening path, we are often not heard or misunderstood by people who are not really at the same state of understanding of the spirituality or whatever it is that we are into. And so having a podcast like this is kind of cool to be able to target a market of people who are actually going to be appreciative of what we have to say, instead of getting a funny look in their eyes and walking away and thinking we're totally nuts.
I think it's great that this is something that technology lends itself to, because we can be so quick and judgmental upon technology and using it. And yes, I agree, we need to be careful, but it's also opening up connections to people from across the globe and bringing the tribe together, the soul family together.
Our topic today is shaman drums. We've recently embarked on our journey of making ourselves some drums. The shaman drum is a drum that I've known about for some time, but I've never actually made one myself personally. And the interesting thing about the shaman drum is that it was I'm not sure exactly when it was invented or first appeared in history, but it appeared with a couple of similar drums, almost identical drums, like the tar drum, and there's the bodhran, and they all sort of appeared at the same time, but on different continents, way back. So very interesting. They've probably been used for healing and for shamanism. I'm not so sure about the bodhran. That's the Irish Celtic drum, but I'm sure that has also been used in Celtic ceremonies and all sorts of magical things.
Yeah, because they're so similar, the bodhran and the shaman drum. I know that you've told me before about the drums emerging in similar places around the world at the exact same time. I thought that was very interesting. I didn't know that the shaman drums were a part of that, so that makes it even more special for me. I think my first awareness, I have never even known about different types of drums. For me, it was always like a djembe, and that's as much as my knowledge around drums went. And then when my sister and our brother-in-law returned from Ireland, they had a bodhran, and that was very intriguing. But I think the first time that I saw a shaman drum was only very recently, in the last year and a half, when we were still residing in Central America. You would go to work, and myself and the children would listen to a lot of spiritual music on YouTube and watch YouTube videos. And I think that's the first time that I saw a shaman drum, and I was intrigued by it. And then Caro Arevelo, which I talk about often, she's one of my biggest inspiration, Peruvian artist. She got a shaman drum, and in one of her videos she was initiating into using her shaman drum. She did a little ceremony where she placed tobacco leaves on it, and she did a song that she was singing to it, and I thought it was so beautiful. And that was the first time that it really like sparked something in me, because I saw for the first time how somebody was using it in a spiritual and in a ritual way, or in a ceremonial way. And then she also spoke about like how you play the drum when you are doing the ceremony of connecting with your drum. You're connecting it to your heartbeat. So if you're really tuned in, your heartbeat will come through in the rhythm of the drum. And that was so beautiful and profound to me. And then I learned more about cacao ceremonies, and then I saw more about how the shaman drums were incorporated in the cacao ceremonies. And that was my first introduction to shaman drums. So what happened was, it was recently my birthday, and all I really wanted for my birthday was a shaman drum and cacao, sacred cacao. And then living now back in Southern Africa, it was quite tricky to find a shaman drum. There were options, but they were a little bit out of our price range. So Denzl was like, well, why don't we make our own?
I mean, isn't that kind of the whole thing with, if you're going to use it for spiritual work, it's even more special if you can make your own drum. I'm not saying everybody can or has the opportunity to do that. My drumming journey started way back, way back in the 90s, and I started making djembes, and the djembes come from West Africa, and there's many different types of drums that they use in West Africa, and they are also used like shamanically for the African medicine and for trance and all of that kind of thing. So, and
can I quickly interrupt there, because that's something interesting that I wanted to say. Like, I think you need to tune into your rhythm and find what works, because I would be playing on the djembes, but I would be playing in a count of 4, and you would always say that's Native American drumming. Like, I didn't even know the different styles. For me, that was just a rhythm that I would hear in my mind. And it was always in the count of 4, where the Western African drum is in the count of 3, right?
Right. So a lot of African music can cross between 3 and 4, and that's what makes it so intriguing. So where I was going with the West African drumming was that was the root of reggae, came from West African drumming, because those were the offbeats that they were doing on the djembes. And then with the slavery that happened, it was taken across to the Americas and to Jamaica, and that's where reggae was basically came from West Africa. The rhythms of reggae. For me, when I started making djembes, it was such a magical journey to be able to source the trees, the wood. So I was living in an area where there was beautiful trees, a foresty space. So I was looking out for camphor wood and jacaranda wood. So I was carving a lot of my drums out of camphor, which was just amazing. When you carve it, the smell comes out. Very medicinal. And these trees were being chopped down. So for me, being able to honor the tree by making something out of it that can sing, and also the skins, The skins are quite another story, I tell you. When you have to I worked with a lot of goat skins, and I worked with a sort of blesbok and springbok skins, and a little bit with zebra. So
we'll get into the spirit of the tree and the animal now, but like coming back to the different rhythms, and it's not to say that, like, what I wanted to say was the shaman drum is not the only drum that is sacred. Right? Like, any instrument and any object can be sacred, and the shaman drum isn't more sacred than a djembe. That's what I'm trying to communicate. And so if you listening to this are more in tune with something like a Western beat or a rhythm with a reggae beat, then that's your inner wisdom, and like you can have a djembe that's your sacred drum. It doesn't mean that a shaman drum is the only sacred drum that is there. But if your inner rhythm feels more aligned to that, or to both, then that's your inner intuition leading you to that.
Absolutely. I think inherently, like, the people that stand on the land. I found when I was in Ireland, when I came back from Ireland, I had Irish music going on in my head.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's where the land that you're standing on is going to generate its sort of pulse and its energy. And that's why even in Africa and in South Africa wasn't actually a drumming nation. We were more a singing nation. The drums were a little bit further north. The drums in South Africa came later when we had the oil drums and that, and they would cover them with skins. But in South Africa, the people in the evening time would sing and clap hands, and that's how they would put the kids to sleep in the night time. Where further up north, the people would be drumming, and like you say, with like the 3 and the 4 rhythm, I think it depends where you are. Maybe the ley lines of the earth or whatever, and that's what's coming through the earth. Through the people, you know.
That resonates for me very much. I was also thinking the other day we were jumping on the trampoline, and I was considering how that's very much a rhythm. And who are the African people that jump like that?
In Kenya,
they jump so
Masai,
high. The Masai. The Masai that jumps.
Yes.
Like that's very much also a rhythm and a drum. Like every time your feet touches the ground, I can imagine that it makes a beat, and like just that rhythm made me somehow think of a shaman drum. Because that's what happens when you're drumming. Okay, so maybe we can talk about that. Like, why is drumming so effective of taking you in a meditative state? Because that's also what the Masai does. Like that rhythm takes them into a trance state or into a different state of consciousness. So why does a drum do that for you too?
I think, you know, like the Bushmen did it as well with their chanting, and there's the clapping, and so I think it's got to do with a repetition. So something's repeating over and over and over and over, and that's putting your brain waves into a state where you are more easily going into a trance state, and basically raising your frequency, I would imagine. So, and chanting as well, if you can use your voice with that repetition. The chanting I've seen just amazing stuff happen with chanting, and I know that it very, very quickly raises your frequency. So a lot of the time with drumming and chanting, you've got to sort of overcome your ego. I'm not a vocalist or a singer, so if I'm going to chant, I tend to find a quiet spot or want to be away from people, and I've only really managed to let go chanting in spaces where I'm far away from people.
Yeah, but I think that what you said about the repetition is interesting, because even when you're doing pranayama or when you're doing meditative breath, you work with counts, right? A lot of the times it would be breathing in for the count of 4, holding for the count of 5, and exhaling for the count of 4. Or there's many different variations of pattern breathing, and that also puts you into a relaxed state of mind. And I think focus as well, because if you're doing a certain rhythm, like you have to focus on 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Like eventually I'm sure that it does become more of a natural rhythm, but you still have to very much be conscious and focus on one thing that you're doing right now, so everything else gets cut off.
Well, that's what makes it very much like a meditation, where you're focusing on one point. And what's nice about the drumming is that once you've got a basic rhythm, you can sort of put it on autopilot, but your mind is still focusing on it, which frees up your subconscious, or that other part of your mind that is open to visions or messages or whatever it is that, oftentimes drumming, you'll be able to tap in and be able to activate your pineal gland, where you will be able to start seeing mandalas appearing that are dancing in front of you, basically from the sound that you're creating.
Yeah, like sacred geometry and
exactly.
sound wave patterns being created. That's interesting. Okay, so that's very much like the inner individual healing from the drum. What is your opinion on taking your drum and going into nature and doing healing for the area that you're in, or healing for someone else?
Yeah, well, I think it's like very quantum in its essence, where you're taking frequency, and sound is actually light and heat, And so you're in a way generating this energy which is resonating outwards and inwards. So I mean, it's actually going inwards,
It is
but we
going
perceive it
inwards,
as
and then
going
you
outwards,
integrate
right?
into whatever is around you. So it's like, again, becoming that one with
Yes.
all that is around you.
And the frequency, especially, I mean, with the drumming frequencies, they are generally speaking deeper frequencies. You do have different frequency drums, but the shaman drums are deeper frequencies, which are sort of more bass, sort of more introspective kind of frequencies. And I've also heard, I don't know if you sent me the information of this once, how the sound of the drum can actually activate mycelium growth and things along those lines, which takes us into another whole discussion.
Yeah, so that article was specifically aimed at talking about mycelium, but it was also talking about when you are growing your own organic food, what you can do is play drums to your plants. But let's leave this for another discussion.
That's
because
a
it
great
activates
discussion.
the growth and the cell, which means that you are then also, if this is true for plants, then you as a living organism are also really benefiting from the frequency from the drum. Like, it's regenerating your cells, regenerating your DNA, and activating healing within you, which is a very interesting subject that we can discuss.
Yes. So going back to the nature thing, I think that there's a lot of things that are going on in nature that are healing nature, like sort of heals itself, like water heals itself. So in the mornings, the birds are going to be chirping, and those frequencies and tones are busy toning the whole area, the whole space. And that's why nature is so sacred, because it keeps healing itself in these ways.
That's true. I think we always think we need to go and heal nature, but I think if she's just given the chance, she does that constantly.
And I find that if you drum, that nature seems to like take the energy and suck it in, as like it's almost like it's entertainment for it, but it's also it's healing. So I don't feel intrusive going into nature with drums, because I think those frequencies are doing magical things to all the things that are growing.
Absolutely. So then coming back to the making of the drum, we were talking about working with the wood and working with the skin, and I think that's like another layer of what makes a drum sacred. I mean, we've been talking about this quite a lot. It's like, what is your intention for this drum? Right? It's just as much as, what is my intention going into this meditation? What is my intention for this Thanksgiving? What is my intention with this manifestation? And the same is true for a drum. Like, if that is going to be what is anchoring the energy into the drum, what is your intention for that?
But the intention is very important, because a drum on its own is nothing, and it's going to have no effect until somebody picks it up and plays it. And then on the frequency, because the frequency is going in and out, you can put your intention onto the sound.
So are you saying, because like for me, working with this drum now that we've been making, for me, every time I've taken my drum, I've really sat with the intention that this drum, for me, the very first one was the bear drum, working with Brother Bear and really showing me and teaching me the ways of patience. And that came through in so many different areas of my life, not just the drum making. Like, all of a sudden it was there in painting or making food, or in daily activities like hanging the washing, and also then in deeper activities like being patient with my own inner growth and my own understanding and forgiveness. And it's like it rippled into so many different areas of my life. But my intention for this drum was to have that support and that envelopment of the courageous bear, the protection and the patience and the very much groundedness that it brings. So every time I would pick up my drum or work with my drum, that was my intention. And so my hope is that when I'm playing that intention will reverberate in the room to whoever's receiving it, through the music and through myself. But then I also get what you're saying is, when you're playing it, you can add on to that intention.
Absolutely.
You can change it every time because energy isn't stagnant. It doesn't conform to one shape. It can be mutable and flexible.
No, absolutely. I think making your drum, having an intention or just good intentions or love or whatever it is, infused into the crystalline structure of the wood, infused into the skin, putting your energy in, of course, is going to make your drum more than just an instrument. It's going to make it like a talisman. So it's going to be holding your intention and your energies. And as you play it, I'm sure you can program it in different ways to put different frequencies out there for different intentions and purposes for healing. So I think it's up to our imagination as to how far we can use these tools, because at the end of the day it is all about your imagination weaving in between this very physical realm.
Mm-hmm. And the spirit of the tree and the spirit of the skin. We've now been experimenting a bit with working with both the skin and a vegan option, a synthetic option for the drums. But then we painted onto that, and that was again another intention, right? But if you're working with the spirit of the wood, the spirit of the tree, what do you mean by that?
Well, these days people kind of cut trees down without even giving it a second thought, where, I've had, you could say, conversations with trees, and and I know that they're very sentient beings, and so it's always been horrific for me seeing these beautiful old trees being chopped down without people even like giving it a second thought at all. It's just, that for me is quite a reflection of the consciousness of humanity in many ways. Not everybody's like that, obviously. So for me, back in the day when I started making drums, to be able to capture a piece of that beautiful wood and turn it into something special, because the tree energy, I mean, isn't it just so gorgeous, the beautiful, it's so strong yet so, and so unmoving in many ways. Well, unless we believe that trees maybe walk around in nighttime, I don't know. What do you believe?
I don't know, like if they're telling us all the truth in all the movies and Lord of the Rings, trees are walking all over the place, maybe.
But such magical and ancient knowledge and spirit, the trees for me are like libraries. And I also do believe that we had ancient mega trees on this planet, and the remnants are some of the mountains that we see. So I think that the trees are part of our sort of ancestral, or our connection to the past, like pretty much like the whales and the elephants. They've got this ancient connection, the old forests, and that's probably why they cut down all the big trees, the really big ones.
It's for the information.
Yeah, to stop us connecting from our real past.
What you always say to me is, whenever we work with the wood, it feels so wonderful working with the wood. It, like the smell and the texture and just seeing it transform from a very rigid piece of wood and then bending it into this circular motion. And you're always like reflecting, like, how am I bending and moving in my world? Where do I need to be more flexible? Really working with the elements of earth and water and fire. You work, and air. You're working with all of them while you're making the drums, and that's so beautiful too. Because also with a shaman drum, with a circular, you're working with the directions, right? And the 360, which is even more of another layer of the spiritual aspect to it, and very much more of the Native American influence there. But I recently had my first experience of working with the skin. You've had a few experiences, like you've mentioned, working with different types of animals before. But it was very interesting because you brought the skin. I was attached to it, and it was there, and I knew that it was going to be a part of my drum, and it wasn't gross to me. Like, it gross me out. I thought like seeing the skin would be very much of a shock to my system, and seeing this thing that belonged to that was a living being. But when it became really very real for me was when we had to soak the skin, and I had to actually touch it with my own hands and push it in under the water. And it's sort of like, I know that it sounds really weird, but like when you see we have a friend that's pregnant at the moment, but when you see your first sonar of your baby, you immediately love that being, right? It's like this deep love that you have. And it was sort of the same. It was not the exact same, but a similar frequency of love that I felt for this skin that I was touching. Like I had this deep empathy and this deep connection with this being. Like it felt like it was my pet, my spirit animal, that has come to me to place onto my drum. And then we couldn't use that skin because it had unfortunately some holes in it. And I was really sad about that, like taking my skin away, because that was already such a part of me. And I think that will be like an underlying essence that will be with my drum, is that very first touch of that very first skin. And now we're getting wildebeest skin as replacement for that one. But it was a good lesson. I can imagine that it sounds very cruel activity of using or making a drum as using a skin. But we didn't kill the animal. We received what would have been given back to the earth. And working with that animal skin was like very much like, wow, this is really such a powerful practice, because you really are honoring this living entity, the essence of this being. It takes away that harshness.
Yeah, it is like, I mean, it is a cruel reality that we live in. It's going to touch all of those mortality things. If you've still got issues about living and dying, I worked with goat skins. I couldn't get that smell off my hands for 3 or 4 days afterwards. That's why I prefer like a wildebeest. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the wildebeest skin more than the goat skin.
It does sort of feel, I don't know, I didn't mind the goat's smell at all. That didn't bother me.
The first couple of times I didn't do, but for me, I did so many of them eventually, that particular smell. And even when I touched goats, when we were in Panama and we were at Lola's farm, just touching the goat, I still have that smell on my hand for like quite some time.
I can imagine that it makes you not really want to interact with a living goat after that. Yeah. But it really does make you, I think it makes you value life so much more. It makes you value animals so much more. It makes you really, for me after that, I was just petting the dogs, and I would have so much more appreciation that they are alive right now and with me, and having so much more empathy and a deepened sense of love for them, and respect, like a lot of respect for the animal kingdom. And we are also just animals, and we're also just going to pass away one day. And imagine if, I won't say this on the podcast, imagine if we had to become stretched into drums.
Well, back in the day when I was making drums, I would joke and say that I'm going to get my back beautifully tattooed, and then when I die, I'm gonna
sure somebody somewhere does that actually.
I'll make a drum. They must just skin it.
Aren't they like skins on display with tattoos, like in a museum somewhere? I'm pretty sure.
I'm not sure about that one.
That's pretty strange. And the carvings of your drums, you mentioned before that became like channelings for you, from messages from the drums itself of what it wanted to be.
Yeah, actually my carvings that I did on my drums were mostly inspired by vision quests with psychedelic mushrooms. I was a lot of the time carving different types of mushrooms, or the kundalini snake, and then some light-hearted ones with fairy mushroom houses.
But are those like your own creative inspiration that you are wanting to inlay there, or do you feel that was always communicated from the drum itself, or from the skin, or from the tree, or is it just visions that came through while you were working with the drum?
I think it was just at that time that's what my influences were, and the mushroom
and your
was
interest
coming through. And the mushroom obviously is also very much to do with the same things we're talking about now, with the crossing over and life and all the things. So
yeah, it's interesting because a lot of your drums that you have now have mushrooms carved onto them. I'm reading this book, Finding the Mother Tree. It goes into the information of how, and this is what you were talking about earlier, is how the trees are very much alive and moving and interconnected with all the other trees around them. But what she goes into is how the mushrooms are working with the trees, and how the mushrooms are what are keeping the trees alive. Like
Absolutely.
they would feed it's under the soil and it's in the root, and so they would provide the tree with carbon dioxide and other nutrients that the tree can't get for itself. The mushroom would give that to the tree, and in turn the tree would give something to the mushroom. And then also the mushrooms would connect to different types of trees. Like they would become like a little nerve connecting the two different types. So it's actually powerful that you're incorporating the mushroom with the tree, because in nature they are already symbiotic.
Thank you for that, because I've never thought of that before. That's some amazing insight. And also thinking about how some trees, when animals are feeding on them, on their leaves, they will send out a message to the other same trees in the area, and then those trees will put tannins into their leaves to make the leaves bitter, so that the animals won't come and eat them.
Yeah.
So maybe the mushrooms are facilitating the communication between the trees.
Ooh, that's very interesting. Like the mycelium network is what's carrying the messages.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting thought, yeah. And it is true what you're saying is like whatever you are working with in your life, for you at that stage was very much Kundalini and the fairy realm. So that's a good place to end this conversation.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you for this. This has been awesome. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, this has been great. So thank you so much for listening to this very first episode. I'm sure that many more will flow from here. Thank you, my love, for all your divine insights and wisdom. Please know that you can support us by liking this episode, by sharing it with those that you think will be in tune with it. And you can also support us on PayPal if you feel so inclined. I'm sending you so much love and so much care. Goodbye.
Ciao.